Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
And welcome back. Yes, it's another edition of the Talking Books and Writing and Stuffs podcast. Talking Books and Stuffs podcast is where you'll find us, but you already have because you're listening, so tell your friends. And today we're going to the west coast, the very west coast of Canada, to talk about the science and superpowers of seaweed with Amanda Swinimer, otherwise known as the Mermaid of the Pacific. Amanda, who came up with that name for you?
I'm trying to think who was the original person who came up with it, and I honestly think that a few people came up with it independently of each other. It's just people that had learned about what I did. The name just seemed to fit, and people that have seen me down at the beach, they definitely multiple times have said, that looks like a mermaid coming out of the water.
So let's go back a bit, your early life. So where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the ocean and seaweed in particular?
So I grew up in one of the most landlocked places in southern Ontario. But my dad was from Nova Scotia, and so for his holidays every summer, we would pack up the car and drive out there, me and my brother and my sister, my mom and dad, and I would just spend so many hours playing on the beaches there where he grew up. And I fell in love with the ocean there and saw my first seaweed there and harvested my first mussels there and all kinds of things. Just fell totally in love with the ocean.
And now you got your formal education at Dalhousie, is that right?
Yes. I had wanted to go there since I was a little kid because there was only one, it was one of, I think, 3 universities in all of Canada that offered marine biology actually at the time. And it was in Nova Scotia, so I was familiar with Nova Scotia. So I had sort of wanted to take marine biology there from a very young age.
And so you did, and then how did you get to the other coast?
Well, in between my university years, I would head over to BC to tree plant as my summer job. So I really fell in love with the rainforest here and the mountains and the ocean, and so I decided that I was going to settle down out west.
And we're talking about the science and superpowers of seaweed, a guide for kids. So maybe we can delve into what is seaweed exactly?
So that is a little bit of a complicated answer, to be honest. But I will try and summarize as efficiently as I can. So seaweeds belong to a larger group of organisms called algae. And algae are really the most diverse group of organisms on the planet. They are taxonomically very diverse, spanning 2 different domains and multiple kingdoms. And they basically range from single-celled, microscopic, essentially like a photosynthesizing bacteria. And then they range all the way up to the huge seaweeds, known as kelps. So when we use the word seaweed, we're really talking about marine macroalgae, or the large algae that live in the ocean. And the seaweed, so it's basically a colloquial term for marine macroalgae, but there's 3 main groups of seaweeds. There's red seaweeds and green seaweeds, and they are in the plant kingdom. And then there's the brown seaweeds, which are in a different kingdom called Chromista.
So when we have an algae bloom, then that's not a good thing, though, is it?
It depends. When they talk about an algae bloom, they're talking about the microalgae, which is quite different, biologically speaking, from seaweeds. But yeah, we are talking about the microalgae.
Now, is there a difference from West Coast seaweed to East Coast seaweed?
There is, yeah. There's definitely different species, but a lot of times there'll be the same family. So there'll be seaweeds from the same family, but they'll look a little different and from coast to coast. So it was really fun for me to include seaweeds from both the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast. It's sort of fun to see the difference in how the different ones look from place to place.
Now, the book is called The Science and Superpowers of Seaweed, a guide for kids. So what made you decide to put together something like this?
Well, in 2021, I had published my first book called The Science and Spirit of Seaweed. And I had just sort of started writing that. I've been hand harvesting edible seaweeds for my business, Dakini Tidal Wilds. And then I've been teaching people about seaweeds for almost as long. And I started really just getting into doing sort of a daily creative writing practice and found that I was often writing about the really interesting and deep experiences I have and have had out in the ocean harvesting seaweed, whether it be sort of contemplating things or experiences with really neat sea creatures. So I started writing about that, and I'd already done extensive studying and teaching on seaweed and health and the nutritional benefits and things like that. So I decided to write a book, and a lot of the students that I teach are kids, and kids are incredibly enthusiastic and fun to teach. So after I put the first book out, I wanted to put a book out for kids, which has a lot of similarities, but a big difference is that there's one section where we explore the kelp forest and all the interesting creatures that live there.
Now, the kelp forest, how far out does it go from the coastline?
It depends. So in BC, the two species that form the canopy of our kelp forests are bull kelp and giant kelp. So typically, if you're in a kelp forest, one of those two species will be the canopy forming species. So they can be not very far out, but the really healthy ones are at least a few hundred meters offshore. And then the giant kelp forest here can be further out than that, like sometimes even half to a kilometer out.
And I know that trees on land are important. Seaweed, we'll call it, which kind of sounds like a name that should be changed, but you can't change it now because when people think of weeds, they think of something bad. So beside that, why is seaweed important?
Oh, man. See, there's so many reasons seaweed is important. Hence it's the word superpowers.
Right.
So it's critically important to the health of the planet. So if we take the larger group that seaweeds belong to, the whole group of algae as a whole, so taking the seaweeds together with the microalgae, they produce between an estimated 50 to 80% of our oxygen, and they absorb about a third of our atmospheric carbon dioxide. And they also are really important in cloud formation. So there's some species of microalgae, the really little ones, when their cells are damaged or die, they release something that's broken down into dimethyl sulfide. And that reacts with oxygen to form aerosol sulfates, which act as nuclei for cloud condensation. And this is a critical sort of global cycle that happens. So they're just really crucial to the health of the planet. And they're also providing that primary production for the entire ocean ecosystem. So everything that lives in the ocean is dependent on the photosynthesis of algae to provide those nutrients that form the bottom of the food chain in the ocean.
And we're talking about seaweed and the science and superpowers of seaweed with Amanda Swinimer. So is seaweed seasonal, or is it there year-round all the time?
It's pretty seasonal, but they're like plants. So some are perennials, some are annuals, and some are biennials. But generally, if you're talking about harvesting seaweed, it's quite seasonal and follows sort of a similar season to plants. But just like plants, if you're in warmer areas, for example, like the Gulf Islands, where I live, that are close to where I live, they're on the east side of Vancouver Island. Their season will start earlier than on the west coast of Vancouver Island, where it's quite a bit cooler.
So when you go out harvesting, is it like one plant at a time kind of thing?
So to be a professional seaweed harvester, so a commercial wild seaweed harvester, you have to cut the seaweed in a place where it will regenerate. So all harvesting is done by pruning. So if you cut an individual seaweed in a particular place, depending on the species of seaweed, then it will continue to grow. So that's what I do. And then I can actually go back. Seaweeds are among the fastest growing organisms on the planet. So I can actually go back to the same individual seaweed a second time in a couple of months and harvest from the same seaweed. So pretty amazing.
No kidding. That's why we call it a super plant, let's say. So when you're there underwater, Gulf Islands, are you noticing anything drastic and changing in the ecosystem of the Pacific Ocean?
Well, I'm actually not in the Gulf Islands, so I'm on the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. So fortunately, where I am, I have not seen a lot of change. The seaweeds the kelp forests are healthy and robust. And a big part of that is that the water on the west coast of Vancouver Island is very, very cold all year round. So it doesn't really change much in the summer. But over on the other side, like the inland Salish Sea, so in between the east coast of Vancouver Island and the west coast of the British Columbia mainland, right, the waters are really heating up there, especially in the last few years. And the kelps, if the temperature rises even a little bit, it can affect their ability to reproduce. And then if it increases by a significant amount, it can actually kill the kelps outright. So I have been seeing a lot of change over there. And traditionally, a lot of the Salish Sea portion that's called the Strait of Georgia used to be full of bull kelp forests. And although there's a number of reasons, we don't know exactly all the reasons and why for its decline. Certainly the warming ocean is not helping it out in any way. So
yeah, so on that note, we'll get something more cheery. On the cover of the Science and Superpower of Seaweeds, we've got a little sea otter sticking up his head through a bunch of kelp. Now, is that bull kelp, the ones with the bulbs on the end?
That's bull kelp, yeah. That's a photographer from Tofino, Jeremy Kurowski. He's an amazing wildlife photographer and surf photographer. But that's a sea otter wrapped in bull kelp, and they actually will tie themselves sort of into it when they go to sleep so that they don't float away in the current. Yeah. Which is kind of a neat little tidbit.
Exactly. And when I was a kid, I grew up in Crescent Beach, just south of Vancouver there. So we'd always find these things that we'd call whips that were long and look like a whip with a bull end. Would that be bull kelp then?
Yes, yes.
So I always thought the bulb was at the bottom, but it's obviously the top. So I got everything wrong all my life.
Yeah, the part, if you ever see the part closest to the skinniest end of the bullwhip part, you might see something that looks a little bit like roots, and that's where it's attached to the bottom. And then that big bulb is full of gases to make it float, and then the blades, part we call the blades or the fronds, grow off the end of that float.
Gotcha. Okay, so talking about seaweed recipes, what do people say when you say, okay, here, have a bit of seaweed? What do they go, oh my gosh, no, or let me give it a try?
Um, it's sort of, people are pretty black and white on it. You know, people are like really enthusiastic, or there's no way I'm going to try that. But for the people that say no way, I let them try my wild harvested black nori toasted lightly in sesame oil. I call that the gateway seaweed, because people that don't like seaweed, they usually like that one. So that's a good way to start for anyone who's feeling a little bit nervous about trying seaweed, because it's a very unique flavor to be sure.
I would think it'd be awful salty, is that right?
Yeah, it's definitely, all the seaweeds are salty. They have that ocean flavor, but some are a lot more salty in their flavor than others. And again, when I go back to the talking about the nori, it's probably one of the least salty tasting of the seaweed. So it's for people that don't want that intense salt kind of flavor, that might be a good one for them to try.
Well, I like salt and vinegar potato chips, so maybe I'll like nori crisps. Are you hoping that nori crisps will replace kale as the go-to thing these days?
Well, they definitely already kind of are. I mean, nori is the seaweed that those seaweed snacks are made from, that you buy in the packages in the store. And those have been, I've been seeing people eating those all the time lately, so I think they're really increasing in popularity.
Now, there's lots of recipes and different work kind of things, not workbooks, but exercises and tidbits in the book. But do you have a couple of favorite seaweed recipes over the years?
Yeah, I'd say one of my favorite things to do with seaweed called winged kelp is to soak a nice big piece of it, and then I'll get a nice piece of fresh local fish. And so you soak the seaweed, it makes it all malleable again. And then you lay it out and you put your fish on top and all your seasoning, and then you wrap the seaweed around it as if you're wrapping it inside a blanket. And then you can put that in foil and barbecue it, or you can bake it in the oven. And it keeps the fish really nice and moist. And then if you cook it with no lid on it, then all the tops of the seaweed on top of the fish get super crispy like chips.
So that's that recipe. Now, excuse me, we're living in the middle of the prairies here. How do we get seaweed if we're not by the coasts?
Well, there's some kinds that you will often these days be able to find in grocery stores. So like the nori. Nori is also the type of seaweed that's in the sushi sheets. So you can often find nori, the seaweed snacks or sushi sheets. Sometimes you can find dulse, but the best bet is probably your local health food store. They'll usually have whole seaweed or ground seaweed, and I sell seaweed through my website as well.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm not sure in the interior, but I would guess health food stores would probably be your best bet.
Gotcha. And this has been Amanda Swinimer talking about the science and superpowers of seaweed. It's sort of a guide for kids, but I think it's family friendly, as you say. So before we wrap up, Amanda, can you give us that website, please?
Yeah, so my website is Dakini dakinitidalwilds.com. So it's DAKINI tidalwilds.com. You can certainly pick up the book at your local independent bookstore or get it from the library, and you can buy signed copies right from me through my website, and you can get dried edible seaweeds as well through my website.
That's great. And the website is Dakini Tidal Wilds, all one word, dakinitidalwilds.com. Amanda, thank you very much. Are you going back to harvesting now?
I'm done for the day, but yeah, I'll be out there soon enough.
Oh, good. Well, thanks very much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.